Hello everyone, in this lesson we're going to be going over nested loops. Now many times when we're coding, we don't always want one loop that runs and when it finishes it exits out and goes into another loop. Sometimes we want to have two loops inside of each other running at the same time. A great example of this will be a multiplication table that we're going to set up in code in this lesson. Now this multiplication table will print out a heading saying multiplication table. Now it's going to prompt the user how many rows of the multiplication table do you want. Now let's say the user inputted 3. Next they will be asked how many columns do they want. So let's say 6. Now when we press OK, it's going to print out a table with a multiplication table that has 3 by 6 in terms of size. So as you can see, it has 3 rows, but it has 6 columns. As you can see, this is what we're going to be working on for this entire section. Now the way this is going to be set up in terms of while loops is that we're going to have a while loop running that's going to take care of the rows. So it's going to take care of 1, 2, and 3 going down this way. Now inside of that we need to take care of each individual column. So as you can see, we have 1 running, and then we're going to have another while loop allowing us to write up to 6 columns. Then we're going to have it go back down, and we're going to have it go into the other while loop, and it's going to start running 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, and 12, and so on and so on. So now we're going to go ahead and code this, and I'm going to show you how to use nested while loops. So let's go over to Komodo, and let's go ahead and clear everything we've had so far except for the script tags, because that's what we're going to be using. We're going to be using JavaScript. So the first thing is we want to make a heading even before the script starts. So right before the script starts, but after the body, we're going to create a heading, and we're going to create this saying multiplication table. So multiplication table. Alright, now we want to start off the table tag inside here. That way in the while loops we can just focus on creating table rows and table datas. So table, and we're going to give this a border of 1. So table border equals quotation mark 1 and close off that table. Now we're going to take this ending tag of the table and we're going to stick it under the script. So under the script, after the entire script has done with, we're going to finish off our table, and we're going to put a dash table slash table should I say, and end off our closing tag for the table. Now we're going to work inside the script tag and be able to create while loops inside of another while loop, allowing us to print out table rows and table datas. Now the first while loop we want to work with is table row, because we want to work on this individual table row over here, and while that is working we're going to have it print out the table datas going this way. So the first thing is we need to create variables for the user to input their how many columns they want and how many rows they want, as well as identifying which number that we want to start with, which will be 1 for both columns and rows. So we're going to create a variable called row. So var rows, let's go with rows, will equal, and we're going to wrap this around the number function, so number, and we're going to do a prompt, so number prompt, and now we want to prompt them how many rows. So in quotation marks, how many rows. Alright, now we add a semicolon, and now we work on our next variable, which will be the columns. So var, and we're going to call this cols, will equal the number, and we're going to prompt them, so number prompt, and we're going to tell them how many columns do you want. So how many columns. Let's go ahead and close that off with a semicolon, and let's now identify what we want our columns and rows to start with. So we're going to create another variable. So variable current row, so this is basically the current row we're working on, will equal 1. And we also want to do the same thing for columns, so variable current column, so current col, will equal 1. So we're going to automatically start off with the current row as being 1 and the current column working with 1. Now we want to create our first while loop. So while, now in parentheses we're going to put our condition, and then we're going to add the curly brace in order to identify the code that we want to run. So what's the first thing we want to work with? Well, we want to work with the rows, because that's what we want to print out first. So while the current row that we're working on is less than or equal to the rows that we have set as the limit, that the user has set as the limit, then what do we want to do? Well, we want to write a table row. Now how do we do this inside JavaScript? Well, we use the document.write line. So we're going to use document.write writeLine, and we want to print out a table row. So in quotation marks, we're going to use a bracket, tr bracket, and then we're going to close off this document.writeLine tr. Now we also want to do another while loop inside of here, and this is where it becomes a nested while loop. So we're going to write while. Now we're going to write another condition, so 2 parentheses, and then we're going to add our curly brace, and we're going to give ourselves some space. So while this row is being worked on, we want to work on the table data for each row that there is. So we're going to use while the current column that's working from left to right is less than or equal, so less than or equal to the number of columns that the user has set. Then what do we want to do? Well, we want to document.writeLine a TD because we want to work with the table data. So document.writeLine, and we're going to put inside here quotation mark, and we're going to put bracket TD, bracket. Now what else do we want to put in here? Well, let's close off right here, and let's keep working. So now we want to actually write the value of the TD. So how we're going to do this, we're going to write document.writeLine. And now what do we want to print out? Well, we want to print out the multiplication between the row that we're on and the column. Now since it's a multiplication table, we're going to take the first number row that we have multiplied by the current column. So for example, when we're running this program, it's going to start off with the current row of 1. Now when we're working on that row 1, column 1, we're going to take row 1 times column 1, which will give us 1. So we want to document.writeLine, and we're going to do a math calculation in here. So we're going to do current row multiplied, so we're going to use the asterisk, and we're going to multiply that by current column. So current column, and let's see if I spelled that right, current column, and that should be it. So current row times current column, and that's the number that we want to print out. Now we also want to close off that TD tag, so we're going to do another document.writeLine, so document.writeLine, and we're going to put a closing bracket TD, and there we go. Now we finished off that TD. And lastly, since we're working on the column over here, now before we enter the second row, we want to make sure we take care of all the rows that the user has, or all the columns that the user wants. So we're going to keep, and we're going to make a counter, so we're going to do current column will equal current column plus 1. This will mean that once we print out that first value of the row times the current column, we're going to add 1 to the column and work on the next TD to the right of it, going this way. Now let's go ahead and exit this while loop that we're working on over here, and let's go ahead and finish our table row. So how do we do that? We close it off using a closing tag of the table row. So we're going to use document.writeLine, so document.writeLine, and we're going to put in parentheses a closing table row tag. And then lastly, all we want to do is do current row. So now that we worked on the first row, we want to go up another row until we reach the user's set number of row, and then we're going to use current row will equal current row plus 1, and that is our entire program. Now we have made a multiplication table. Now looking back over this, let's go and see what we have done and make sure we're able to read and be able to understand exactly what we are doing inside here. So let's go ahead and start from the body. So we're going to be printing out a multiplication table heading, and we're going to start a table with a border of 1. Now inside the script, we're going to start off and start with a couple of variables. So we're first going to ask the user how many rows do they want and how many columns do they want, and we're going to set those in the variables rows and columns. Now we also want to start off with a current row and current column, so that way we can keep track of which column we're working on. So we're going to start off our current row at 1, and we're going to start off our current column at 1. That way we can start working with this data point over here. Now we want to make a while loop. So we're going to start off by working through rows and then individually going in through the table data. So while the current row is less than the desired row set by the user, we're going to document.writeLine a table row. That way we can start off one of these sections over here. Now, while the current column, which is starting off at 1, is less than the column that the user has set, then what we're going to do is we're going to create a TD. So we're going to work this way, and we're going to multiply the current row that we're on by the current column that we have set. So starting off, it would be 1 by 1, which would give us 1. And then lastly, we're going to close off that TD and add 1 to the current column. That way, when it loops back up over here, it's going to become 2, and then we're going to have 1 times 2, which will be 2 over here, and so on and so on. Now, once it finishes doing that table row until it reaches current column will equal current column plus 1, all it's going to do is going to document.writeLine a table row, and it's going to set current row equals current row plus 1. That way, we can work on the next table row. Now, looking at this code, I can already tell there's going to be one problem and that we need to go ahead and fix that. So now I'm not sure if you could spot the problem yet, but let's go ahead and look at what happens to this while loop once it finishes. So this while loop is going to take care of all the TDs in here. So it's going to go through the TD value or the current column value of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Now what happens when it gets to 6 and it reaches that limit is that it's going to leave this while loop and come back over here to build another table row. Now the problem is when it starts building that other table row, we want it to reset back to the value of current column equals 1. Because if we don't, we're going to have it keep and start at 6. So it's going to be basically 2 times 6, which would give us 12. And that's not how we want to do it. We want 2 times 1, 2 times 2, 2 times 3, rather than it continuing off this number over here. So what we have to do is we have to reset our current column number inside the while loop. Now, just by putting it here, it doesn't really do anything because it tells us that this is our starting point, and this is good to have as our starting point. But what we need to do is when it exits out of this while loop, we need to have it reset back to number 1. So that we can do this is we can put it right before or right after this document.writeLine. So we can go ahead and say current column will equal 1. And that way, when it comes back and leaves this while loop, it'll go back over here and reset itself to current column equals 1. And let's go ahead and fix this variable. So var current column will equal 1. And that is how it's going to be. So once it finishes this while loop and finishes up going up to the limit that the user has selected, the current column number is going to reset back to 1. That way we can do 2 times 1, 2 times 2, and then 3 times 1, 3 times 2. That way we don't have to have it keep going, and it's going to basically, if we didn't have that, it's going to be like 2 times 7, 2 times 8, 2 times 9, which is not what we want in our multiplication table. So that should be it. We can go ahead and test our code in Google Chrome. Alright, there we go. Now it's asking us how many rows do we want. Let's go ahead and say 25. How many columns? Let's go ahead and say 25 as well. And there we go. Now we have a multiplication table that prints out a table above 25 columns by 25 rows. So there you go. Now you just built your first pretty advanced JavaScript program. So until the game and until the next lessons, I'll see you guys then.